Right, sir. Now the next topic what we'll be talking about is this drainage system, sir. Right. Now put it very system, when I talk about drainage system, it is nothing but the river systems in India, sir. And almost we'll almost talk about the three different topics what comes under this drainage system. One, we'll be talking about the basic difference between the two or more different river systems in India. That is, what is the difference between the northern rivers or the so-called Himalayan rivers versus the peninsular rivers. Right. Apart from that, we'll be talking about the patterns of drainage system in India. And finally, we'll be talking about a very small component, what we call them as a drainage basins. Right. We'll start with this Indian drainage system first. See, whenever I talk about the drainage systems, we are just talking about the network of rivers. Why it is called as a drainage, I have an idea. Because this is one system through which the surface water of the land is completely drained. Right, so that's the reason you call them as a drainage system. Right. Now, there are different ways how exactly the rivers in India can be classified. You call them as a east flowing rivers, you call them as a west flowing rivers. This is one way of classification. For example, you can put directly yourself in this map. It is called as Indian drainage systems. Map itself is called as Indian drainage system. To find this Indian drainage systems or river basins, whatever it is, at least two maps you can find, sir. One, drainage basins are shown. In another map, you will find that east flowing rivers and west flowing rivers classification is shown. Right. Now, when I talk about this east flowing rivers and west flowing rivers, this is one way of classifying. Now, what is this east flowing river? Idea says any river which confluences in Bay of Bengal, you call them as east flowing rivers. Any rivers which confluences in Arabian Sea, you call them as a west flowing rivers. This is one way of classification. Right. Apart from this, this is direction of means based on the direction of flow, you have a classification. But more accepted way of classification is a source-based classification, sir. Where exactly this river system is sourced from. When I talk about this source-based classification, we have two very important types of rivers. One, you call them as Himalayan rivers. And two, you call them as a peninsular rivers. So it is Himalayan rivers versus peninsular rivers. Name itself suggests Himalayan rivers. It means that these are the rivers which originates from Himalayas. Most of these rivers originate from glacier. Right, again, whenever I talk about words like all, right, we deny it because exceptions are always there. But understanding says most of these rivers are originating from glacier. Right, sir. So almost when I talk about Himalayan rivers, either I can call them as Himalayan rivers or given the topographic nature, I can say that all northern rivers of India I qualify to be called as Himalayan rivers, and all that southern rivers or that rivers which flows in the peninsular part of India, I call them as a peninsular rivers. Right, sir. So this is geographic classification based on source. Now, when I talk about Himalayan rivers, sometimes it is also called as extra peninsular rivers. Let us not confuse with this word because it is flowing or it is having its flow outside the peninsular region. You call them as extra peninsular rivers. Sometimes Himalayan rivers can also be called as extra peninsular rivers. Right, sir. Now, based on the nature of its flow, whenever I talk about based on nature of its flow, Himalayan rivers, they are perennial rivers, sir. Now, what is this perennial rivers? They flow throughout the year, you call them as a perennial rivers. Now, when I talk about the peninsular rivers, they are non-perennial rivers, sir. They are non-perennial rivers. It means they flow only during a particular season, that is the season of monsoon. Right. That's the reason you also call them as a seasonal rivers. So very basic difference between Himalayan rivers and peninsular rivers. How exactly they are called as? One is perennial, throughout the year it flows. One is non-perennial. Right. You call them as a seasonal rivers. Now comes another question. Why this Himalayan rivers is perennial in nature? Because it is fed by glacier, and India, countries like India is located on a tropical region. Though I talk about the higher altitudinal location, ablation of glacier is felt throughout the year. Right, sir, melt of glacier is throughout the year. Right, the rate of melt may differ from season to season, but ablation is almost happening throughout the year, sir. If that is the case, can I say it is perennial because it is glacial fed, sir. These rivers are fed by glaciers. You call them as a glacial fed rivers. And when I talk about peninsular rivers, how exactly they are fed? What is the major source of this peninsular river? It is monsoons. Accordingly, you call them as a monsoonal fed rivers. That does not mean that Himalayan rivers are not fed by monsoon. Somewhere you can also write it is also fed by monsoon. Right, sir. So basic difference between Himalayan and the peninsular river, we have just taken it, sir. And whenever I talk about this perennial rivers, which river is more suitable for navigation? Of course, it is the perennial rivers or the Himalayan rivers. And technically speaking, we say that river water regime is minimum, sir. What is this river water regime? Somewhere you can take it. This is fluctuation of water. So whenever we talk about the navigability of a river, wherever you have this river water regime minimum, this is more suitable for navigation, sir. So it is all about fluctuation of river water, sir. So when I talk about regime, in the peninsular river, it is maximum, sir. So river water regime is very, very maximum, very high in the peninsular part. So as the case, we understand it is more navigable. And when I talk about the peninsular rivers, they are less navigable, sir. They are less navigable. Right, sir. So some of the basic difference between Himalayan and the peninsular river, we have taken it. Now comes the question. Right, we also know whenever, though I say this, it is glacial fed, it is fed by glacier, that is the Himalayan rivers. We also said it is also fed by the so-called monsoon. Now comes a very important question. When I talk about the degree of flooding, sir, right, which river is known more for flooding? Undoubtedly, it is Himalayan rivers. It is known for more flooding, sir. More prone to flood. And when I talk about peninsular rivers, it is less prone to flood. See, whenever you write your mains examination, few topics we always see that it is an evergreen topic, sir. One of the topics is flood, sir. Why I say flood is an evergreen topic is very simple, because when I talk about your mains examination, hope so you're writing it, right, sir, September 20th, if I'm not wrong, right, 2019. Now, whenever I talk about September 20, right, why flood every year? It means once in 2 years you experience one, or it means you have a question from landslide, you have a question from flood. Because whenever I talk about landslide, some places in India, landslide is caused by flood. Some places in India, landslide is caused by earthquake. But landslide caused by flood is almost higher in its magnitude and degrees. Now, so whenever I talk about these aspects, when exactly they happen, for example, whenever I talk about flood or landslide season in India, it is between this June to September, sir. And just to tell you, that is the 3 months what exactly precedes your examination. Right, it means fresh in mind, current affairs, part of current affairs, every year you will find. Every year you will find that flood comes in, every year you find that almost landslide happens. Why exactly? Because this season overlaps with the monsoon, sir. When I talk about southwest monsoon, when I talk about the period of southwest monsoon, it is June to September. So flood happens almost everywhere. But still, when I talk about the degree of flood, where exactly it is highly prone to flood is northern parts of India or the northern plains in general. Now comes the question, why? Whenever I talk about the northern plains in India, we said that northern rivers or Himalayan rivers are more prone to flood because, one, if you are there in June to September, sir, what is the season here? It is summer. Plus, I have monsoon, sir. When I talk about summer, what I understand, ablation will be very high, sir. Rate of melt of glacier will be very high. And when I talk about precipitation, concentrated precipitation. Melt of glacier is also high, and when I talk about precipitation is also high. If that is the case, flood is not a disaster. Right, sir. What is a disaster? Anything which is not expected, you call them as a disaster. You expect it, right? You don't call it as a disaster. So it is just an event, right? Flood is an annual event in all these rivers. It is almost bound to be flooded during this season, right? Because it experiences both this phenomena coexisting together, sir. Higher ablation and higher precipitation. So that is the reason northern rivers and northern plains in particular, it is more prone to flood. Right, sir. Now, some basic difference between this Himalayan rivers and peninsular rivers, we have taken it. And one more thing, it means few books, they also brought this point. Like a feature, like a mountain, river may also have its own age, sir. Few rivers you call them as an young age. Few rivers you call them as a mature. Few rivers you call them as an old rivers. Now what determines the age of the river is the age of the feature itself. If the feature is young, you call them as a young rivers. If feature is mature, you call them as a mature river. And of course, if the feature is old, you call them as a old rivers. It means we also have a temporal dimension of a river. Now comes another question. Which comes first? Is it mountain or a river? For example, when I talk about a river, when exactly I can have a river which is flow or which is flowing? Any river should have a gradient. Now comes another question. Which comes first? Is it a gradient or the river? Only if gradient is there, I can have a river. So mountain always comes prior to the flow of the river. But when I talk about the difference in their age, it is not so great. Almost I can take hand in hand. Right? If feature is young, river is also as young. Feature is old, river is also old. Or feature is mature, river is also mature. Something like that. If that is the case, here between this Himalayan rivers versus peninsular rivers, which will be young and which will be mature, sir? Himalayan rivers or young rivers, sir? Because feature is young, young fold mountains. When I talk about the peninsular rivers, they are more of mature rivers, sir. I don't call it as an old rivers because still some gradient, substantial gradient is there. For example, when I talk about Western Ghats, outside Himalayas, peaks of Western Ghats happens to be the highest peak in India. When I talk about peaks like Anemudi, so this is the highest peak in India outside the Himalayan component. It means considerable height is still there. That's the reason you don't call it as old, I call it as mature, because still some features are left. Right, sir? So most of the peninsular rivers, they are mature in its formation. One technical word is also there. Right, sir? So whenever I talk about okay, maybe young rivers and mature river, we'll just stop with it, sir. Even the technical word will not take it. Right, sir? These are some of the difference what lies between the northern rivers versus the southern rivers, sir. Or, sorry, the northern rivers, southern rivers, instead of northern and southern, let us call it as Himalayan rivers and peninsular rivers. Right, sir. So basic difference we have taken it. Now, with this basic difference, sir, now moving on to the second aspect, it is called as drainage patterns, sir. So how exactly a river system may almost have its behavior, or how exactly it almost have the temporal behavior and the spatial behavior, you call them as a drainage pattern. Right. When I talk about the drainage pattern, it is the nature of the flow, sir. Nature of the river system, you call them as a drainage pattern. So two ways we can almost define the drainage pattern. One, based on the spatial component on it, we call them as a spatial pattern. Or instead of spatial pattern, you take it as geographic patterns. On the other hand, we also have a genetic pattern, sir. Right, sir. You call them as genetic pattern and geographic pattern. Now, what is this genetic pattern? Genetic pattern is more of a temporal orientation or temporal dimensions. Temporal and dimension. When I talk about genetic pattern, geographic pattern, it is more of spatial in nature. Time and space. Now, what is this geographic pattern? Make it very simple. This is the most popular pattern. Right. For example, I am talking about a river system. I am not talking about a river. I hope you understand the difference between river and a river system. Network of river. You call them as a river system. So what is a river system? all the rivers, or I would say one river along with its all tributaries and distributaries taken together, you call them as a river system. Now, if I take the aerial image of it, say a photo of it, how exactly the shape of this river may look like, right? Based on this shape, if that classification comes in, we call them as a spatial classification, right, sir? You call them as a geographic pattern, right? When I talk about the temporal dimension, how exactly from time to time the changes have taken place. Whenever my almost classification is time dependent, I call it as a genetic pattern. We call them as a temporal classification. What is very important here is geographic pattern, sir. Spatial classification, right, sir? Same time but different space. You call them as a spatial classification. Same place but different time. You call them as a temporal classification. Spatial classification is geography. Temporal classification is history, right, sir? Now, if that is the case, what we'll take it as very serious or very important for our discussion is this geographic pattern, sir. But still, one genetic pattern, we may take it into consideration, right? Now, what are the different genetic patterns we have? At least 5 different genetic patterns we have, sir. One, you call them as consequent. 2, we call them as subsequent. 3, we call them as subsequent. 4, we call them as antecedent. And number 5, we call them as resequent. So these are the 5 different types of genetic patterns what we have. Now what is very important here is only this antecedent river system, sir. Others are not so important for us. Only antecedent river system is important for us. So only we'll be just giving more emphasis to this antecedent river systems conceptually. So one popular question always comes in the examination. They'll be just giving you the sets of rivers. They'll be asking you whether it is antecedent or not. See, nobody completely knows whether this list of rivers are antecedent or not. But one thing we can say, few rivers at least we can say that this is not antecedent, right, sir? On what logic we can say, we'll just arrive at the later stage. But only one we'll be taking for our discussion, that is antecedent, sir. When it comes for geographic pattern, some very popular pattern comes in, sir. One you call them as trellis pattern, sir. 2 you call them as dendritic pattern. 3 you call them as rectangular. All these are major types of patterns. Trellis, dendritic and rectangular, sir. And when I talk about the minor type of classifications, extension of geographic patterns, right. Furthermore, I call them as inland drainage. I call it as radial drainage. I call it as superimposed, or before superimposed, we may talk about braided profile. And we may also talk about superimposed drainage. We also have a drainage system called as annular drainage, but annular drainage, the examples are not there in India, so we'll not take it into consideration. So these are some of the patterns of drainage what we'll be seeing. How exactly river system may look like if I'm just going for an aerial photography, sir. Right, satellite image or the aerial view, how exactly the river system may look like. Put it very simple, what you find it in your atlas. Right, what is the shape that one river system almost looks like? This is what you call them as geographic pattern. Right, sir. And the reason for taking this geographic pattern is very simple, because when I talk about examination, only 7 rivers we find it is very important. They ask you about the tributaries, distributaries and this river system itself. What are they? Among the Himalayan rivers, it is 3, sir. That is Indus, Ganga and Brahmaputra, sir. When I talk about the peninsular river, I have 4, sir. Right, decreasing order of importance, that is Godavari, Krishna, Kaveri and Mahanadi, sir. Right. So these are the rivers where we have to take utmost care, where the tributaries and distributaries will be taking into discussion. And one more thing, plenty of tributaries we have. Ganga alone we have somewhere around 21 direct major tributaries. Right, 21 tributaries, I said it is not needed. Not needed. More than that, we have also said one side it is not needed, one side it is not possible. Right, sir. Now what we'll do, only the major tributaries we'll just add it. Indus, Ganga and Brahmaputra already we have added. Where? While doing the plains of India. Right, sir. So one place we have just added while doing the plains of India. Indus we have added, very important tributaries. Right, Ganga we have added, Brahmaputra we have added. But now we have not added Godavari, Krishna, Kaveri and Mahanadi, sir. Now we will be utilizing this opportunity to add some of the very important tributaries of these rivers. Right, again I am telling you only the major tributaries of these rivers will be adding it. Right, sir. So geographic pattern will give us the avenue of adding the same, sir. Right. Now going one by one, sir. Now genetic pattern directly will not take antecedent. What is what of every type of genetic pattern? At least a line we'll just add it, sir. What is consequent, what is subsequent, what is subsequent, what is subsequent, and so on, we'll just add it. Now, somewhere, whenever I talk about consequent, all this said, we said it is a temporal dimension. Right, it means how exactly a river from time to time behaves or changes its character, you call them as a temporal classification. Now what is this consequent, sir? Any river which flows in its original gradient. Imagine that a mountain is created, just a mountain is created, and a river also flows in this original gradient. You call them as a consequent. If this slope or flow direction is modified because there is a change in the original slope or original gradient is changed, if that is the case, if this river is going for a change in its direction, you call it as a subsequent in its flow. Right, sir. So whenever I have a river which is flowing in original slope, right, a feature is just now created, a river which is flowing out of it, you call them as consequent in nature. If the original slope is modified, and if at all if I have the change in the course of the river due to this modification, you call them as subsequent. Now slightly deviating. If that is the case, among the Himalayan versus perennial rivers, which is more of consequent and which is more of subsequent? Young rivers are more of consequent and mature rivers are more of subsequent. Right. Now a very basic definition you can take it. What is consequent? Any river which flows along the available gradient, any river which flows along the available gradient facilitated by the initial slope is called as consequent flow. Or slightly you can modify it, make it very simple. Any river which flows along the original available gradient, any river which flows along the original available gradient is called consequent flow. So most of the young rivers of the world, they are consequent in nature. Now comes the question, what is subsequent to them? So informally we have seen features as some age, right? For example, feature can be young, feature can be mature, or feature can be old. Not only feature, even when I talk about cohort, that is your population, age sex pyramid. Very popularly you call this cohort as age sex pyramid. Right, sir. Now how exactly it means the entire, it means when I talk about the sex pyramid, it is between this male and female sex ratio. When I talk about this age pyramid, right, sir, I understand. Right, at least the entire population I can divide into three categories. What are they? You call them as young, you call them as mature, you call them as old, sir. In a similar fashion, I also have the same terminologies coming with respect to a feature, suggesting that even like features, like you, like everybody, feature also has an age. Right, you call them as young, you call them as mature, you call them as old. Right, sir. Now, if feature has an age, understanding says one feature which is almost formed over a period of time, right, now it can be young, right, with the promise that later it will become old. Right, sir. Nobody is an exception. Right, sir. Now, if that is the case, one thing is for sure. Right, every feature will experience a transition. Right, a feature may have an experience, it can experience two transitions in its life, sir. One, it can from young to mature, it can have a transition, and from mature to old, it can again have another transition. Now, whenever I talk about the transition from young to mature, if feature goes from young to mature, what happens? The river also enters the mature stage. So whenever there is a transition, what is felt with the river? Whenever a river enters from young to mature or mature to old stage in its transition, you call them as a subsequent flow, sir. Right. It means it is not flowing in its original gradient. Now the slope or the gradient is altered, modified. That is what the understanding is. Now make it very simple. As a definition or description, you can write it. Whenever a river along with its feature encounters a transition from either young to mature or mature to old, is called as subsequent flow. Right, sir. So whenever there is a transition, it enters the second stage, that is subsequent in nature, sir. So what is consequent, what is subsequent, we have an idea. Now comes the third classification called as subsequent. Subsequent, to some extent you can take it. What is subsequent? Say for example, whenever I have a river, sir, imagine I have a river. This river is flowing in a particular direction, sir. Imagine that this river is flowing from east to west in direction. Right, I have only two directions. Right, that is east and west. Right, I don't have a classification called as north and south. If this is the flow, general flow of the main channel, now in general, what will be the flow direction of the tributaries and distributaries? In general, it should be in accordance with the same flow. If main channel is flowing in east-west direction, in general, right, I may also have the tributaries and distributaries flowing in a similar direction. Right, sir. This is very, very normal. But sometimes you encounter a situation where main channel, when I talk about a main channel almost flows in a particular direction. And when I talk about a tributary flows in an opposite direction. Such type of a pattern, we call them as subsequent flows. As a description, you can write it. When the tributaries of main channel flows in opposite direction with respect to the main channel, it is called as subsequent flow. When the tributaries of main channel flows in opposite direction with respect to the main channel, you call them as subsequent flow. Right, sir. Now in India, at least two river systems is known for its subsequent flow, sir. Very fine example, one you have in the case of Narmada, sir. Apart from Narmada, you also have this river called as Tapi. Tapi and Narmada is two fine examples of rivers being subsequent in its flow. But one thing is very common. That is the reason why we find that this river is subsequent in its nature. What is so common among Narmada and Tapi? These are the rivers where the majority of the flow is through the Rift Valley region. These are not the only two rivers in India which flows through the Rift Valley region. But when I talk about Narmada, near complete flow of Narmada is through a Rift Valley region. When I talk about Tapi, majority of the flow is almost through the Rift Valley region. Not only that, even when I talk about rivers like Mahanadi, when I talk about Godavari, to some extent it flows in a Rift Valley region, but very minor regions. Right, sir. But when I talk about the near complete flow and majority flow of this river, they are through a Rift Valley region. Now, both the rivers, if possible, we'll also note down some of the tributaries, sir. Directly you can put yourself in map of Madhya Pradesh, sir. If you're there along Narmada flows towards the west. And when I talk about the tributaries of Narmada, you will find that almost it flows towards the east, sir. You're there in map of Madhya Pradesh. Directly there's a separate map called as Madhya Pradesh. Political map, just see where Madhya Pradesh is given or not. If not, go to the respective map, sir. You're there in map of Madhya Pradesh. If you're there along Narmada, you may find this tributary which flows in the east. It is called as Chota Tawa, sir. A tributary called as Chota Tawa. Right, sir. Now, one fine example with the Narmada, we have taken it. Same map, like Narmada, what lies south of Narmada? The more prominent example of subsequent drainage is this Tapi, sir. Plenty of rivers you can find that it is confluencing with Tapi, which flows in opposite direction. General flow is opposite direction. For example, you may find rivers like Girna, may find rivers like Panjara. The left bank tributaries of Tapi, at least two important tributaries of Tapi, which almost makes Tapi to be subsequent in its flow, sir. Right. So what is subsequent? That also we have an idea. Only few we have taken it. Even I am not sure whether Girna and Panjara is the same order or different. Changed, interchanged. If I am not wrong, it means one more river also you have, Bori, which comes exactly between Girna and Panjara, sir. Right, some classical example of subsequent drainage pattern in India, sir. Right. So what is subsequent we have taken it. Right. Now coming to the very important area, it is called as antecedent river flow, sir. So layman's way of understanding antecedent river means very old rivers, sir. This old river is not a temporal classification, right? This old river means they are older than the feature. For example, whenever I talk about the consequent in its flow, we said only when a gradient or slope is there, I can have a river which is flowing. Now again, we raised one question, right? What came first, whether a feature or a river? We said that feature came first. Once the gradient is created, I have the river which is flowing. So we said gradient came first or the mountain came first. Right, sir. Now when I talk about antecedent river, there is a change. Now when I talk about the antecedent river, these are the rivers which is older than the feature in what it is formed. Say for example, though in general we said Himalayan rivers are antecedent, right? Some of them, they are not young. They either belong to the mature age or they belong to the old age because they are older than Himalayas. So whichever river was flowing earlier than the formation of the feature, you call them as antecedent rivers. Somewhere you can write it. Antecedent rivers or very old rivers. Antecedent rivers or very old rivers. They had their formation. They had their flow, you can write it. They had their flow even before the formation of the relief. Even before the formation of relief. They had their flow even before the formation of relief. What did I say? They had their flow even before the formation of the relief, right? This relief within bracket you can write it as a mountain. Right, just for your own understanding, one line you can add it. Antecedent rivers are those rivers. Antecedent rivers are those rivers which are older than the feature, in which it flows, or over which it flows. They are older than the feature over which it flows. Right, sir. Now, what is an antecedent river? We have an idea, very old river. So whenever I talk about Himalaya, understanding says Himalayas should have come first, then these rivers in Himalayas should have come. But when I talk about these rivers, they have existed even before the formation of relief. That is, even before the formation of Himalayas, these rivers were actually flowing. Right, at least when I talk about India, 3 river systems is identified to be an antecedent river, sir. What are the river systems? It is Indus, Ganga and Brahmaputra, sir. So when I talk about Indus, Ganga and Brahmaputra, so these are the 3 rivers, what we strongly believe that they are antecedent rivers. These are the rivers which is older than the feature over which it flows, and it, of course, it flows over the feature called as Himalayas. So these rivers are older than Himalayas. Right, we strongly believe it, you also believe it, sir. Right. Now at least it means we have evidence which is suggesting that it is antecedent rivers. Right, without the evidence never we say so. Right, sir. But we'll also talk about the arguments which supports the almost some of the evidences which supports this argument, that also we'll take it. Right, sir. On what basis we say that this is antecedent rivers. Right. Now, these are some of the rivers, what you call them as antecedent river. Today, when I talk about the flow, right, today this is how the flow of these rivers almost have their flows. But when I talk about the ancient time, before the formation of Himalayas, it is strongly believed that this river, almost it was flowing in east to west fashions. This is how this river was actually flowing. This ancient flow is often referred as a river system called as Indo-Brahm rivers. It's called as Indo-Brahm river. Or sometimes it is also called as Shivalik rivers. It is also called as Shivalik river. So this is how the ancient reference of the same almost it is identified. Now this Indo-Brahm river, according to this thesis, they strongly believe that this Indo-Brahm rivers, once it was flowing in this direction, almost got trifurcated into 3, that is Indus, Brahmaputra and Ganga, sir. And of course it was flowing in the ancient arm of Tethys Sea, sir. Before the formation of Himalayas, that sea what was existing there, we had a sea called as Tethys Sea. Right, sir. Now, what are the evidences that suggest that these rivers are antecedent? Generally we say, or sometimes you can say, argument in favor. What exactly suggests that these rivers are antecedent? At least few arguments in favor. When I talk about these arguments, sir, the first and foremost, sir, right, we call them as a longitudinal long profile. We call them as a longitudinal long profile. Though it is a technical term, we'll understand what is this longitudinal long profile. Within bracket, you can write moving along the mountain. You can write it moving along the mountain. Cutting across different longitude, it is called as longitudinal profile, but still. Generally, Brahmaputra, Ganga, Indus, they call it as a longitudinal rivers. When I talk about rivers like Nile, they call it as a latitudinal rivers. It means cutting across different latitude. Now you put it in this way. When I talk about longitudinal long profile, though I am not justifying this longitudinal nature, I am just talking about this long profile. It is moving along the mountains or flowing along the mountains. Just for our understanding, I am just writing this sentence. Flowing along the mountains. Now, why this argument we have taken for our discussion, that also we'll just take it, sir. For example, imagine you are there in peninsular part of India. You are there in Western Ghats, sir, aerial view of Western Ghats. Almost you are there in aerial view of Western Ghats. Right. You are there in the west coast, sir. Western Ghats has two slopes. What are the slopes? One, you have the eastern slope and you have the wet slope along the west. It is called as western slope. Right, sir. The leeward side and the windward side. Now, when I talk about Western Ghats, somewhere we have justified Western Ghats to be a water divide, sir. What is this water divide? A mountain almost separating two different types of, or two different river basins, or two sets of river, you call them as a water divide. Now here, when I talk about rivers like Godavari, sir, when I talk about rivers like Krishna, when I talk about rivers like Kaveri, they almost originates from Western Ghats and flow towards the east. When I talk about rivers like when I talk about rivers like Baipur, when I talk about rivers like Periyar, when I talk about rivers like Sharavati, Netravati, etc., right, they flow towards the west, sir. I have a number of rivers which is flowing towards the west. And all these west flowing rivers originate from the western wall and all the east flowing rivers originate from the eastern wall. This is a very simple logic. Now, if I am just almost taking a cross section of it, assume that one cross section I am just taking it. This is the eastern wall of Western Ghats and this is the western wall of Western Ghats. Now, any river which originate from the western wall of Western Ghats, they move towards the west. Eastern wall of Western Ghats, they move towards the east. One thing is sure. Whenever I talk about a river originating from any slope, I understand these are the rivers which is flowing away from the mountain. Right, sir. Almost I find that the flow of the river is perpendicular to the mountain. They are flowing away from the mountain because I have a gradient which is moving away from the mountain, so the river is also moving away from the mountain. But exception Indus, exception Brahmaputra, exception Ganga. Why? They don't move away from the mountain, they move along the mountain. Right, sir. If I'm just taking Himalayas here, I find, right, at least Ganga post reaching the plains, it starts moving parallel to the mountain. If I understand that this is Himadri section, sir, if I understand that this is Himadri section, be it Indus or be it Sangpo, sir, be it Sangpo or Indus, they flow parallel to the mountains, sir. They just flow parallel to the mountains, right? Moving parallel to the mountain is not a common phenomenon. Because every river, what I understand, they move away from the mountain, but this is one scenario where rivers are moving along the mountain. Why? It is very simple. Because understanding says initially I would have had this Indo-Brahm river which was descending south. But when this Himalaya got its formation, slightly it was avoiding the Himalayas. Further, when Himalayas almost grown in its longitudinal extent, further it was avoiding Himalayas. Now, one thing you will understand, whenever I talk about the bend of Indus and bend of Brahmaputra, right, they are coterminous, right, with the so-called extension of Himadri itself. When Himadri ends, these river, right, suddenly it takes the complete change in the direction. So, what is the understanding? Brahmaputra or Indus is almost trying to descend towards south, but Himalayas is not allowing it to descend towards south. So, only thing is that every extension, Brahmaputra is finding a place to surpass Himalayas. Indus is finding a place to surpass Himalayas. That is the reason why this river is flowing longitudinal in its orientation. That is the reason why this river is flowing along the mountain, not away from the mountain. Right, sir. But the crux of the matter is only one line. Right. Whenever I talk about longitudinal long profile, this is not so common. What is a longitudinal long profile? Flowing along the mountain is longitudinal long profiles. But what is the normalcy? Normalcy is flowing away from the mountain is normalcy. So longitudinal long profile, we have justified this is not a normal scenario. Right. So here the understanding says the flow direction of Indus and Brahmaputra would have been modified by the genesis of the Himalayan Cordilleras. Right. So one factor we have taken it, we have just justified. See, one more thing, technicality, almost getting into depth of it is not needed. At most examination, they just ask you, they give you a river, they ask you whether it is antecedent or not. Only that much we should know. Right, sir. The second reason why I am just taking one more argument in favor, it is a syntaxial bend of Indus and Sangpo, sir. And talk about syntaxial bend, a kind of a U-turn of Indus and Sangpo. Argument 1 and argument 2, they are complementary in nature. For example, when I talk about syntaxial bend, a kind of a U-turn. What is this U-turn? One place I find Indus is taking a U-turn. Another place I find Brahmaputra is taking on U-turns. Now, river taking a U-turn is not so common. Why? Every river is consequent. Every river flows along, means according to the available gradient. Imagine when I talk about Indus, till one particular point I have Indus which is flowing towards the east. All of a sudden, I have complete direction change of Indus. Indus which was flowing from east to west, all of a sudden takes complete turn and it starts moving towards east. Similarly, when I talk about Brahmaputra, almost it was flowing towards the east, right, surpassing a peak called as Namcha Barwa, almost it takes one U-turn, complete bend, where the westward flow of the river starts. Right, sir. Now, river taking an U-turn is completely right. It is not normal. Again, when I talk about the U-turn, this U-turn is coterminous with both exterior ends of this Himadri, sir. Now, what exactly it suggests? It suggests, like statement 1, Indus and Brahmaputra is avoiding what? Himadri. Right, sir. It is almost avoiding Himalayas. Right. So, it means Himalayas is tough to be almost fought. So, it is just almost finding an alternate route. Right. Gives you the sample of life also. Right. If some opponent is very difficult, right, look for an alternative route, sir. Right. That is what Brahmaputra and Indus is almost making it. So, it is just giving you an idea that again this point favors that these rivers were antecedent. The path of the rivers were modified by the genesis of Himalayas. Right. Now, this is what the flow direction of this river is all about. Right. So, then, sorry. The argument 2, almost we have taken that it is syntaxial bend. U-turn of a river. Again, let me repeat it. It is not common. Right. See, for example, already we discussed about it. You have a concept called as meanders. Meanders. What is meanders we know? Sluggish flow of the river, you call them as a meanders. Layman's way of understanding, right, wandering of a river. Right, river has no objective in life. It doesn't know where to go. Right, sir. It is almost wandering here and there. You call them as a meander. Now comes the question, why a river meanders? Because slope is not there. Volume of water is great. The carrying capacity of the river also reduced. Right, but it doesn't have a gradient to flow. There it almost wanders. Number of U-turns you have. Right, number of twists and turns you have, number of U-turns I have. But this U-turn of meanders is completely different from Indus and Sangpo. Excuse me, yeah, Indus and Sangpo. Reason, whenever I talk about meanders, one thing I understand, whatever be the number of U-turns it takes, general direction of the flow is towards some direction. Right, sir. Whenever I talk about river in general flow, it may be a east flowing river or it can be a west flowing river. But Indus is not the case. Right. Indus, the majority of the profile was towards the west, and at one moment it has become towards the east. Similarly, when I talk about Sangpo, it was flowing towards the east, and the complete direction flow of the river has changed towards the west. Right, sir. So, meandering and syntaxial bend is two extremes, though U-turn is common among them. Right, sir. Now, change in the complete direction of the river is not common. Right, sir. So, second argument also we have taken it. And the third argument, a very interesting argument, right, it is with respect to Yamuna, sir. Changing course of river Yamuna. Today when I talk about Yamuna, Yamuna is a tributary of Ganga, sir. Yamuna is a tributary of Ganga. Now when I talk about Yamuna, Yamuna is not a static river. Right, sir. Yamuna is not at all a static river. Yamuna keeps on shifting from place to place. That's the reason sarcastically we say Yamuna is a political river. Maybe the model of UP politics is inspired by Yamuna. Right, sir. Now when I talk about Yamuna, what happened? During almost early Pleistocene epoch, sir, Yamuna was a tributary of Indus River. Right. During the late Pleistocene epoch, what happened? Yamuna got itself detached from this Indus as a river system. It started moving towards the east. While moving towards the east, somewhere around the late Pleistocene epoch, it came into contact with two other rivers. You call it as Luni and you call it as Ganga. Right, sir. And that time, along with Yamuna, Luni and Ganga, it was very happily flowing in the Arabian Sea arm, sir. Right. Somewhere during the early Holocene period, what happens? Yamuna further started shifting its course towards the east, sir. That time it has completely betrayed both these rivers. That is, Luni and Ganga completely left behind. Right. This betrayal of Yamuna is seen as the reason for Luni and Ganga becoming inland in drainage, sir. Today, these two rivers do not meet the sea. They are inland in drainage. Further, they started shifting towards the east. Right, sir. And at one point of time, what happens? It has completely pirated the waters of Saraswati, sir. We had one ancient river. This river was called as Saraswati. And along the pirated waters of Saraswati, it has completely taken the waters of Saraswati and finally it has confluenced with Ganga, sir. Right, sir. This is what the changing course of Yamuna is all about. Right, sir. How exactly? Once Yamuna was a part and parcel of Indus, then it was making a separate almost river system with the Luni and Ganga. Then further it got detached itself from Luni and Ganga, further shifted towards the east, finally confluenced with Ganga, taking all the waters of Saraswati. Right, this is what the story of Yamuna is all about. Now the story of Yamuna is not needed, but what is important here is the changing course of Yamuna. Right, every river changes the course. No river is static. For example, when I talk about rivers which has changed the course in the very recent time, I have a river called as Teesta. Right, one flood. 1765 we had one flood. This flood has changed the course of Teesta. Teesta was earlier the tributary of Ganga. Now it is the tributary of Brahmaputra, but more predominantly it is Padma rivers. Right. So what I understand, a river which is almost being a tributary, it is not completely permanent in nature. That is another reason why we say nothing is permanent in geography. Right, sir. So course of the river changes. Now, taking the story that Yamuna was shifting from west to east, what exactly it suggests? It suggests that some gradient difference is taking place. It suggests that the flow direction of the river is actually changing. Right, sir. If the flow direction of the river is changing, why exactly the flow direction of the river is changing? Because the slope is changing. Right, sir. And why exactly this Indo-Brahm river system would have changed its course? The same reason why Yamuna was changing its course. Right, sir. Again, Yamuna's change of course is seen, almost taken as an argument to support that these rivers are antecedent in nature. Right, this is the region which is subjected for change in the original slopes. Now, three arguments. Maybe the faint memory you can have the story as such, but these three arguments you can write it somewhere. That is one, longitudinal long profile of Indus and Sangpo. What does it suggest? Right, here rivers are flowing along the mountain, not away from the mountain. Number one. Number two, syntaxial bend of Indus and Sangpo, U-turn of a river is not so common. Changing the entire direction of the river is not so common. Again, another argument we are taking it. Third, changing course of river Yamuna. Yamuna had a history of completely changing its course from west to east. From being a part of Indus, it has become a part of Ganga. Right, sir. All these three arguments together we are just taking to suggest that these rivers are antecedent, sir. It means feature is almost developing. The development of feature is actually changing the course of the river. Right, sir. So these are the arguments what we are taking. Now comes the final part. What is antecedent? We have an idea. What are the arguments in favor? That also we have an idea. Now comes the exhaustive list of antecedent rivers in India, sir. What are the list of antecedent rivers in India? Right. Now Indus, Brahmaputra and Sangpo, they are known list. Now comes the secondary list. Right. It is not only Indus, Sangpo and Brahmaputra. All the major tributaries of Indus, Sangpo and Brahmaputra. Somewhere you can write it. In your own terms, how to identify an antecedent rivers? In your own terms, all major Himalayan tributaries all major Himalayan tributaries of Indus, Sangpo and Ganga. Sangpo is nothing but Brahmaputra. Right, sir. So it is not only Indus, Sangpo and Ganga we are taking it. Their major tributaries also we are taking in, suggesting that they are antecedent rivers, sir. Only thing is that we have to come to a conclusion, or we have to come to an agreement, right? We have to accept whether this is an antecedent rivers or not. Now comes the final exercise, sir. Now somewhere in map of India or map of Jammu and Kashmir you can take it. Whenever I say major tributary, how do you almost justify it as a major tributary? The length of this river should be considerable, sir. It should be Himalayan in origin, right? Apart from that, it should have some considerable length in it, sir. The only thing is that we'll just discuss about the possibility of whether this river can be an antecedent or not. What about the possibility of Shyok being an antecedent river, sir? You're there in Jammu and Kashmir, you can find Shyok as a river, which exactly flows between Karakoram and Ladakh range, sir. Shyok. Political map, you can very easily see Shyok. Parallel to Indus. You have Shyok. Exactly between Karakoram and Ladakh range. What is the possibility of Shyok being an antecedent river? Yes or no? Yes. Very good, sir. What about the possibility of Jhelum and Chenab? To somewhat, yes. Right. Because I understand long profile of the river is considerable, and of course they are Himalayan in origin. What about the possibility of Sutlej? Yes, because most of the books says Sutlej is an example of, right, antecedent river. These are some of the very important antecedent rivers of Indus river system. Now again, let us not make exhaustive list. Idea is very simple. It should be Himalayan in origin, and number two, it should be a longer river. That's the reason I said it should be a major tributary. Right, sir. Now Indus, to some extent we have an idea. Now coming to Ganga, sir. You can put yourself in map of India itself. So there in map of India. So when I talk about Ganga, what is the possibility of Yamuna being an antecedent? Yes, Himalayan in origin. Major tributary? Possibly yes. Right, sir. What about Gantak? Possibly yes. Ghagra? Possibly yes. Gomati? Yes. Kosi? Yes, because most of the book says Kosi. Right. It means all this Himalayan tributaries of Ganga, which is major tributaries, we are just adding it. Again, no source says the complete exhaustive list. But only thing is that sometimes I can eliminate, right, a river being antecedent in nature. Now, how I can eliminate? For example, when I talk about rivers like Son, what is the possibility of Son being antecedent? No, very less. No. It means you can reject it. Reason? It is a peninsular tributary. Though it is a tributary of Ganga, it is originating from the peninsular part of India. Right, completely you can eliminate. When I talk about rivers like Chambal, though it's a tributary of Ganga, not a direct tributary, it's a second order tributary. When I talk about Chambal, what is the possibility of Chambal being the antecedent? No. Again, it is a peninsular rivers, peninsular tributary. Right, sir. So all the peninsular tributaries, however, whatever be the length of the river, you can completely eliminate it. Right, sir. Now finally you are there in Brahmaputra river, sir. You are there in northeastern states. Now what is the possibility of Lohit being antecedent in nature? You are there in northeastern states. Possibility says to some extent it is yes, though not a very major river, but I understand Himalayan in origin, Lohit. When I talk about Dibang, a river called as Dibang, possibility says yes. See, these are very major rivers. Why I am taking this name? Because Dihang, Dibang and Lohit, the confluence of these three rivers is the place where I have the broadest profile of Brahmaputra starts. Right, sir. Now one more river to add. When I talk about rivers like Subansiri, sir, you are there very near to this place called as Majuli Islands, sir. We find this river called as Subansiri. Now what is the possibility of this river being antecedent? Yes, possibility is there. Right, we cannot say yes or no, means almost concretely you cannot say, but still possibility is there. Now comes another question. What is the possibility of Disang being an antecedent river? Possibility is very, very less. Same Majuli Islands. The left bank tributary you can find this answer. Possibility is very, very less. Right, sir. Now, some of the rivers we have just taken it. Again, let me conclude. Not only Indus, Brahmaputra and Ganga we are taking it. Some of their important Himalayan tributaries also we are considering that they are antecedent in its river. Right, antecedent in its flow. It is completely logical, sir. What you can eliminate for sure, you can eliminate in the examination. Right, sir. Now, antecedent we have taken it. Maybe resiquent we leave it. Not so important, sir. Now, coming to this geographic pattern, sir. Geographic pattern. When I talk about the major systems, first comes trellis pattern, sir. Trellis pattern means a parallel pattern, sir. You call them as a parallel pattern. So trellis here means parallel pattern. Now what is this trellis pattern? Whenever I talk about the tributaries of a river, it means when I talk about geographic pattern, right, almost I am talking about the aerial image of it. How exactly the aerial photography or image may look like, the complete system may look like, accordingly I can classify. Right, this geographic pattern is nothing but shape-based classification, sir. The shape-based classification, how exactly, what shape it looks like. So when I talk about trellis pattern is a parallel pattern, sir. And name itself suggests that it's a parallel pattern. Right, hiding the symbol almost used for parallel, sir. Now, what is this trellis pattern? Whenever a tributary confluences with main channel parallel to each other, sir. Imagine, I have a main channel. Whenever I have a main channel flowing in a particular direction and when the tributaries flow parallel to each other, I call them as a trellis pattern, sir. Right. So, whenever a tributary flows parallel to each other and eventually confluences with main channel, you call them as a trellis pattern. Sometimes you can write it or some way you can write it. When the tributaries flow parallel to each other and eventually confluences with main channel is called as trellis pattern. Right, sir. The finest example of this trellis pattern, it is with respect to Yamuna subsystem, sir. So why I am insisting on this word called as Yamuna subsystem? Because Yamuna itself is not a system. Ganga is the system and Yamuna is a part of this system. That's the reason you call them as Yamuna subsystem. So finest example when I talk about Yamuna subsystem, sir. Map of India itself, or you are there in map of Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh. Even if you are putting yourself in map of Madhya Pradesh, you can find number of rivers almost flowing parallel to each other. So physical map of Madhya Pradesh you can find. If you are able to find this Yamuna, sir, Yamuna to some extent, right, you find a series of rivers flowing parallel to each other. Say for example, you may find rivers like Chambal. Chambal is a very important tributary of Yamuna, sir. Very important tributary. Chambal. Almost it flows along this Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh border, sir. Chambal, which is known for its ravine. Chambal is known for its gharial population in the wild. That is crocodile population in the wild, sir. Right. Many reasons Chambal is known for. Right. Now, parallel to Chambal, you may also find another river. It is called as Sindh, sir. A river called as Sindh. Further, the eastern extension of Sindh, you may find rivers like Betwa and rivers like Ken, sir. Often Betwa and Ken used to be there in news for their attempt of interlinking of these two rivers, sir. Is it Kenva and Betwa? What comes first? Was it right? That is what written. Right, sir. So these are some of the rivers of Yamuna, which almost becomes an example of trellis pattern, sir. So what is a trellis pattern? Parallel pattern. At least now we had an avenue of seeing some of the very important tributaries of Yamuna. All the tributaries what we have taken as an example is not to justify that Yamuna is an example of trellis pattern, but these tributaries are itself important. That's the reason we have brought in. Right, sir. So Chambal, Sindh, Betwa and Ken, all tributaries are important, sir. Right. One more example of this trellis pattern if you are looking for, it comes in the another form. It is called a zone subsystem, sir. Again a subsystem of Ganga. Right, sir. So one geographic pattern, how exactly trellis pattern may look like, we have an idea. Now slightly moving forward from this trellis pattern. Coming to the second pattern, it is called as a dendritic pattern, sir. This dendritic pattern is called as a tree-like pattern. So how exactly the branches of the main tree will be attached to the trunk, right, sir? Similarly, this river system may also look like, right, sir? This is the most commonest type of river systems or this geographic pattern what we have. You call them as dendritic patterns, sir. A tree-like structure. Now, when I talk about the examples of this dendritic pattern, two very important examples we have, sir. One, it is with respect to this river called as Godavari, sir. And the second important example of this dendritic pattern we are taking with the example of Krishna. Now again, let me insist, what is important here is Godavari and Krishna, because only 7 river systems we said it is very, very important. When I talk about the peninsular rivers, decreasing order of importance, Godavari and Krishna, it is very, very important, sir. So that is the reason we are just almost having one avenue where the tributaries of Godavari will be almost known for. Right, sir. Now if you can almost travel along Godavari as a river, this may not be the original flow direction of Godavari, but just insisting that how exactly dendritic pattern may look like. Like that branches that is attached to the main trunk, sir. I have the tributaries of this channel, almost which is attached in the same fashion. This is how dendritic pattern may look like, sir. Now, already once we have traveled along this river Godavari, source of Godavari you know, right? You are there in the eastern wall of Western Ghats. You are near this place called as Nasik. You are there in this plateau called as Timberg Plateau, sir. Right. Now from here, Godavari as a river starts. What are the different states through which it almost flows? That also you know. From Maharashtra, it enters the state of Telangana. From Telangana, it enters the state of Andhra Pradesh. Only 3 states I have. Right, sir. Now, if you start almost traveling along this river, sir, some of the very important left bank tributaries you come across, sir. One, a very important river called as Pranhita, sir. Almost all these rivers you will be finding along the boundaries between 2 states. Maharashtra and Telangana, you will find this Pranhita as a river, sir. Political map, just looking for the political boundary between Maharashtra and Telangana. You find Pranhita as a river. When I talk about Maharashtra and Chhattisgarh boundary, yesterday Gadchiroli was there in news. Right, this is the place where I have a very famous river. This river is called as Indravati, sir. Right, sir. Further, I am just almost extending it towards the east. And Indravati, a value addition. When I talk about Indravati, Indravati is also known for one very important waterfall in India, sir. Often this waterfall is regarded as Indian Niagara, sir. It is called as Chitrakoot waterfall. So this fall is often called as the Niagara of India, and this Niagara is located along this river called as Indravati, sir. Right. Why it is called as Niagara is very simple, because it resembles the same shape, but size it is miniature, sir, very small. Right, sir. Now two rivers, very important river, Pranhita, Indravati. And further, if you slightly extend towards east, not so important. If you want to remember this river, you remember, otherwise not, sir. You have rivers like Sabari and rivers like Sileru, sir. Rivers like Sabari and Sileru. Telangana and Chhattisgarh border, sir, almost. You have rivers like Sabari. Chhattisgarh and Odisha border. If not Odisha border, I think Andhra Pradesh border. You have Sileru, sir. And just this fact suggests that most of the state boundaries drawn or taken along the river banks itself. Right, sir. Now some of the very important left bank tributaries of Godavari we have taken it. And if at all, if you are searching for one important right bank tributaries of Godavari, sir. But I am not sure about the right bank tributaries. Can you identify some right bank tributaries of Godavari? Manjara, very good, sir. Right, sir. So only one right bank tributary we are taking with Godavari. It's called as Manjara, sir. So just insisting on the fact that it almost resembles that of a tree-like structure. Accordingly, you call them as dendritic pattern. Now, if you want to remember only three tributaries of Godavari, you remember, sir. That is Pranhita, Indravati, where you have Chitrakoot Falls, and of course one right bank tributary called as Manjara. Sabari and Sileru, if you want to remember, you can remember. Otherwise, even with this, we can almost answer the question, sir. Right. Now, one Godavari we have taken it. Apart from Godavari, another equally important example we have in the name of Krishna, sir. So I am just retaining the same shape, almost suggesting that it is almost having this dendritic pattern. Again, when I talk about Krishna, from source to destination, you know. From where exactly the source of Krishna? Where is the source of Krishna, you know? Right, it is Mahabaleshwar, right, the eastern wall of Western Ghats, and 4 states through which it flows. Right, it means from Maharashtra, it enters the state of Karnataka, from Karnataka, Telangana, and Andhra Pradesh. So far we know. Right, sir. Now, very carefully, if I am just adding the tributaries, sir. One very important right bank tributaries of Krishna. Very important, one of the major right bank tributary of Krishna, you call them as, sir, Tungabhadra, sir. You have a tributary, and this tributary is called as Tungabhadra. Right, sir. When I talk about left bank tributaries, you have rivers like Bhima. One major tributary, left bank tributary, you have a tributary called as Bhima. Apart from Bhima, a tributary which flows through Hyderabad. Often this tributary is known for its urban flooding nature. You call them as river Musi, sir. But again, only 3 rivers we have to remember. That is one of the very important right bank tributary, Tungabhadra, you remember. Apart from Tungabhadra, you please do remember Bhima and Musi, sir. Others, if you are remembering or not remembering, it is not going to make much difference. Right. If you want to add a few more tributaries, you can add it. Further traveling east, you have tributaries like Paleru, and further east you have Muneru, sir. It's Muneru, Paleru. Right. Taking this name itself is difficult here. Leave it. Right. So Paleru and Muneru. If I remember, this is the order. Confirm it. Possible. Right. Right, boss. Some of the tributaries of Krishna we have taken it. Some of the tributaries of Godavari we have taken it. Again insisting, only few tributaries you remember, sir. Godavari, at least remember Pranhita and important tributaries like Indravati and Manjara. The same fashion, when I talk about Krishna, the largest right bank tributary of Krishna comes in the name of Tungabhadra. Right, apart from Tungabhadra, you have Bhima and Musi, sir. Only that you remember, that should be fine enough. Right, sir. So dendritic pattern we have taken for our discussion. Moving further, the last type of major pattern, sir. It is called as rectangular drainage. Now this rectangular drainage is a special type of trellis pattern, sir. What is trellis pattern? You know. What is trellis pattern? Tributaries flowing parallel to each other. Now what is this rectangular pattern then? Whenever I talk about tributaries which is moving parallel to each other, and if at all if it is confluencing with the main channel at right angles, sir, then you call them as a rectangular drainage. Right, sir. It's also a case of a trellis pattern, special case of a trellis pattern where the tributaries confluence with the main channel at right angle. The same words you can write it. Rectangular drainage is a special case of trellis pattern. Is a special case of trellis pattern where the tributaries confluence with the main channel at right angle. Right, sir. Now when I talk about the examples, again, Krishna and Godavari, we have added two more rivers. What is important in our list? Right, we can add it here. Both are examples of rectangular drainage. First comes the name of Mahanadi, sir. Again, though still now we have not almost traveled along this river called as Mahanadi. If possible, right, you can find the source of Mahanadi and approximately you can travel along the course of Mahanadi, sir. Only two states it flows. Not too many, only two. Orissa already you know. Right. So apart from Orissa, which is the state of its origin? You are there in Chhattisgarh, sir. You are there in this plateau called as Dandakarneya tableland. Or you are there in this plateau called as Bastar plateau. So Mahanadi originate from Bastar plateau, sir. Only two states I have Mahanadi. Now when I talk about Mahanadi, after traveling along the course of Mahanadi from source to destination, now what we can do, some of the very important tributaries we can add such that these tributaries almost confluence at right angles. One very important left bank tributary you may come across, this tributary is called as Sionath. And slightly traveling towards east. Now you can identify almost rivers flowing parallel to each other. You have a river, this river is called as Hasdo. Slightly eastern extension of Hasdo, you have rivers like Mand, and further eastern side of Mand, you have rivers like Ibs. And Ibs is a river. Almost it confluences with Mahanadi. The confluence almost a very famous reservoir you have. It is called as Hirakud reservoir, sir. So these are some of the rivers which almost confluence at right angle, making Mahanadi as an example of a special type of trellis pattern, what we call it as a rectangular drainage, sir. Now again, Mahanadi being an example of rectangular drainage is not so important. Mahanadi itself is important for us. Right, sir. So tributaries of Mahanadis is very, very important. Right, sir. And one more tributary if you want to add, you can add. This is called as Till. A tributary called as Till. Right, sir. So some very important tributaries of Mahanadis also we have added, sir. And finally, the last in the list, where we will be taking as an example, beyond it we will not add any other tributaries, itself is a word of motivation, sir. It comes with a river called as Kaveri. Right, sir. Again, the second example where you have a rectangular drainage. So Kaveri already you know, sir. From where to where I have Kaveri. Source to destination already you know. Right, sir. Talakaveri to almost the deltaic regions of Coromandel coast. Right, sir. How many states through which it flows, that also you know. 2 states. But when I talk about drainage basins, it is 4 political units. Because Pondicherry, let us not call it as a state. Right, sir. Governor is more powerful. Right, sir. Now, when I talk about Kaveri, at least the course of the Kaveri you know, sir. Now, what is very important? The left bank and right bank tributaries are important for us. Only the name we'll take it, we'll search it, sir. Left bank tributaries are not so major with respect to Kaveri, only few are there. Among the few, the major names we'll take it. Almost if you're putting yourself in the state of Karnataka, sir. Further slightly extending towards east, where you have reservoirs like Chamrajnagar, etc. Right, you have another important tributary, it is called as Shimsha, sir. Or it is called as Simsha. So when I talk about left bank tributaries, only few very important names if I am just taking it. One comes in the name of Hemavati, sir. See, what is the left bank and right bank tributaries? You must be knowing it. And only one challenge is there. Flow direction of this river will determine whether it is left bank and right bank. Right, sir. So when I talk about Ganga, left bank tributaries are Great Himalayan in nature. When I talk about Brahmaputra, right bank tributaries are Great Himalayan in nature. Why? Because the flow of river determines the same. Right, sir. Now, Hemavati, apart from Hemavati, you may find rivers like Simsha, sir. Apart from Simsha, if you want to add one more, very near to Bangalore, you have this river. This river is called as Arkavati, sir. Right, sir. Now, what is very important with Kaveri is the right bank tributary. And some of the right bank tributaries, you will find that they have their origin from Kerala and almost they confluence with Kaveri as such. Some of the very important right bank tributaries of Kaveri, you may find this river called as Lakshman Tirtha, sir. Lakshman Tirtha. Almost you are there near this Krishna Raja Sagar, sir. You are there near Mysore. Right, sir. Now further, if you travel slightly towards east, after Lakshman Tirtha, you may find rivers like Bhavani, slightly even I am confused whether Kabini comes first or Bhavani comes first. It's Kabini. Right, sir. So after Lakshman Tirtha, you have this river called as Kabini. Further eastern extension of Kabini, you have Bhavani. where across this river you also have a very important reservoir called as Bhavani Sagar. See, number of reservoirs are there located along this Kaveri as a river. Right, at least two very large reservoirs are located across Kaveri itself. One, almost the early course, upper course of the river, you have this Krishna Raja Sagar. Right, sir. Apart from Krishna Raja Sagar, as and when this river enters the political boundary of Tamil Nadu, there you find another very important reservoir. It is called as Mettur Reservoir, sir. Sometimes also called as a Stanley Reservoir. Right. So some of the right bank tributaries we have taken it, Lakshman Tirtha we have taken it, Kabini we have taken it, Bhavani we have taken it, few more rivers if you want to add. One of the most polluted river of the south, always we say. Of course, this is the fact. It is a Noyal river, sir. Flows through Coimbatore, flows through Tirupur, flows through Karur, sir. Right. Now we know the reason why it is polluted, sir. Right. Now, apart from Noyal, when I talk about the last major tributary of Kaveri, I have in the name of Amaravati, sir. Right, these are some of the major rivers of Kaveri, which is the tributary of Kaveri. Apart from tributary of Kaveri, if you want to add one very important distributary, sir. Only one very important distributary we have, it is called as Kollidam, sir. Kollidam is the important distributary of Kaveri. It is not a tributary, it is a distributary. Almost you are there very near to Trichy. Right, this is the place where Kaveri almost gets bifurcated into Kollidam and further flows as Kaveri itself, sir. Right, some of the major rivers in India, we have done it. All the tributaries and distributaries of these major rivers, we have taken it. Question potential area, we have just completed, sir. Right, all this question potential area, we have just completed. Others are not so important for the examination, but still inland drainage and others will just have a word, what is so and so, sir. Right, when I talk about the minor patterns, some of the others we'll discuss about. In this others category, first comes inland drainage, sir. Now, what is this inland drainage? We have an idea. What is this inland drainage? Any river which do not confluence into the ocean, you call them as inland in drainage. Even if it is confluencing in a very large water body, very large lake, marshlands, it is immaterial. Right? If it is not confluencing in the sea, if it is not confluencing in the ocean, you call them as inland drainage. Right, sir? Somewhere you can write it as a definition. Any river which do not ultimately confluence, any river which do not ultimately confluence into an open ocean or sea, is called as inland drainage. Right, sir. So what is inland drainage? We have an idea. Now comes the question, why it is inland in drainage? Why it is inland in drainage? This is what the question is all about. Right, sir. Now, what are the different reasons? What are the different factors which makes this almost a drainage pattern as inland in drainage, sir? What can be the potential reasons? Very important, as somebody said, it is volume of water. So, understanding says when the volume of water is very less, there is a chance that it becomes inland in drainage. Volume of water plays a very prominent role. Right, sir. Volume of water. When volume of water is very, very less, right, sir, it becomes inland in drainage. Now, is it only volume of water? Evaporation, if that is the case, prevailing climates. So, when I talk about the inland drainage of the world, normally when I talk about inland drainage of the world, they are normally confined to the drier location. For example, when I talk about India, plenty of inland drainages are there in India. At least two major inland drainages in India, if I just go by name, it is one, it is Luni, and two, it is Gagar. What is so similar about the states in which it flows? Arid. It means when I talk about Gagar, Gagar do not flows in Rajasthan, it flows in Haryana. When I talk about Luni, Luni flows in Rajasthan and Gujarat. Right, sir, what is so common prevailing climate? So what is the prevailing climate here? Either it should be an arid or semi-arid type of a climate, sir. Right, very good. Prevailing climate plays a very important role. But again, all river which almost flows in this arid or semi-arid region may not become inland in drainage. For example, any river that flows through a desert may not become inland in drainage. For example, I have a river called as Nile. When I talk about Nile, Nile flows along Egypt. Right, Nile flows along the desert region of the Egypt. But still, Nile, when I talk about Nile, Nile is not inland in drainage, rather it is a perennial river. Right, sir. Now, what is almost making Nile to be perennial river is volume of water. Right, both the factors act hand in hand. Right, sir. Is it only that these two factors make inland in drainage? The third very important factors, for example, when I talk about rivers like Jordan, sir, I have a river. This river is Jordan. Almost it flows exactly between the border of Jordan and Israel. Right. What this happens to this river in the sense, this river almost surpasses a point. This point itself is lying below mean sea level. Now comes another question. Can you have that piece of land, right, where the altitude is lower than mean sea level? Is it possible? Very much possible. Indian example itself is there. What is the Indian example? Kuttanad. When I talk about Kuttanad of Kerala, it is located below the mean sea level, but not inundated by water. How it is possible? Say for example, imagine that this is the land area, sir. This is the land area. Right. This is where I have the mean sea level. Right. So I have some restriction. I have almost geographic pattern such that it means mean sea level may not able to almost enter this particular location. So understanding says I can have a place which is located below mean sea level, but still not inundated by water. Kuttanad, finest example as we said. Now imagine a condition. I have a river which flows through this depression. Can this river, right, emerge out of this depression? Answer is no. Right, this river becomes final in itself. Right, this means almost such concept, you call them as a loss of gradient. You call them as a loss of gradient. Finest example, Dead Sea, sir. Why I am taking Dead Sea? If I just remove all the waters of Dead Sea, sir. If I am just removing all the waters of Dead Sea, right, the floor of the Dead Sea happened to be the deepest point in Asia. Right, sir. So at least I understand, if this Jordan as a river would have not inundated Dead Sea, right, sir, Dead Sea would have not been a lake. And what about Jordan? Can I call this Jordan as a river to be inland in drainage? Of course, yes, because Dead Sea, as the name indicates, it is not a sea, it is just a lake. Right, sir. So this you call them as a loss of gradient, where a river almost touches a place or it almost surpasses a place which itself is placed below mean sea level. Right, in that case, this river cannot re-emerge outside this depression or away from the depression. It becomes the end in itself, sir. You call them as loss of gradient. These are the three popular reasons why exactly river becomes inland in drainage. Let us not take the example of Yamuna, sir. Right. Only the global scenario, these are the reasons for it. Right. Three reasons we have taken it, and finally some of the very important inland drainage rivers in India. By name we will take it, sir. If you are there in Rajasthan and Gujarat region, sir. So the very important names. The most commonest name what we have is river Luni, sir. Right, sir. You have this river called as Luni. You are there in Rajasthan and Gujarat. Apart from Luni, you also know one more name. It is a river called as Ghagar. Ghagar in Haryana. The same map, to some extent, you can find Ghagar also. You are there in Rajasthan map, you can find the river called as Ghagar. Or even map of Haryana, or even map of India, you can find Ghagar. Two very prominent example of inland drainage rivers in India. Ghagar of Haryana, Luni of Rajasthan and Gujarat. Now, apart from Luni, you are not confining to the state of Gujarat, sir. When I talk about Luni, where exactly Luni confluences? Luni confluences along the salt marshes of Rann. right? You call them as a little run or you call them as run of Kutch. So this is the place where almost Luni confluences. So whichever river confluences in this run of Kutch region, right, all these rivers, you call it as inland drainage. What are the other rivers you encounter? You encounter rivers like Rupen. You have all, apart from Rupen, you also encounter rivers like Banas. See, this Banas, you call them as a West Banas. At least we have two Banas, sir. This Banas, though West is not added in your atlas, you can write it as West Banas, sir. Here also you have one river called as Saraswati. This Saraswati is different and ancient Saraswati is different. So you have rivers like Rupen, you are there in Gujarat map. You are there along this Run of Kutch region, very near to all this region. You have rivers like Rupen, Banas and Saraswati, some finest example of inland drainage in India, sir. Right. So inland drainage, we have taken it. With inland drainage, moving on to another drainage, it is called as radial drainage. What is a radial drainage? That also we know. Radial drainage is an example of a centrifugal flow, sir. It's an example of a centrifugal flow where you can have a river which is flowing in different direction from a mountainous course. To justify that one river system or just one feature as an example of a radial drainage, minimum number of rivers that is needed for justification is 3. And such that these 3 rivers should flow at least in 3 different directions. It is not that 3 rivers, I am taking all 3 rivers flowing in the same direction. No. 3 rivers, minimum direction, right, 3 different directions. Right, if at all, if I have such flow of a river, then the same is called as a radial drainage, which itself is an example of a centrifugal flow. Centrifugal, you know, away from the center. Right, so all these rivers, they flow away from the center. Now, when I talk about radial drainage, only conical feature or conical mountains become an example of radial drainage, sir. Right. Already we have seen radial drainage in different aspects or different places of our discussion. Only thing is that here we'll just consolidate all the names. Right. Now, when I talk about some of the very important radial drainage, descending order of importance, sir. The most important example of radial drainage, it is Amarkantak Hills, sir. Amarkantak Hills. Every book says Amarkantak Hills. There is no second opinion about Amarkantak Hills because all the rivers which originate from Amarkantak Hills, they are very popular rivers, very famous rivers. If you remember what are the rivers which originate from Amarkantak Hills, the same has been taken as the evidence for almost support that this is an example of a radial drainage. Right, very important rivers like Narmada, we have taken it, sir. So Amarkantak Hills is an example, or it is the source of Narmada. Apart from Narmada, one of the very important right bank tributary of Ganga, we have taken it, it is Son. And very recently we have seen this name, the tributary of Mahanadi, the left bank of tributary of Mahanadi, we have taken the name of Hasdo, sir. So all this Narmada, Son, Hasdo, every river is an important river. Right, all these rivers originate from Amarkantak Hills. That's the reason this example itself becomes, right, very, very important, sir. Now apart from Amarkantak Hills, what are the other names we have taken it? One we have taken as Mandav Hills, sir. Mandav Hills in Gujarat. Few books says Mandav Hills and few books says it is Girnar, sir. So both the names I am just taking it. Whatever comes in the examination, both you go for it. Both you are there in Kathiawar table land, sir. You are there in Gujarat. You are there in Gujarat. So either it can be Mandav Hills or it can be Girnar. Right, sir. And the third example, you are there in northeastern states. You are there in Mizo Hills, otherwise also called as Lushai Mountains. Lushai Mountains. Right, sir. And when I talk about the rivers that originate from Mizo or Lushai, again the set of rivers are very, very important. Right, because this river once it was national waterway number 6, but later it was renumbered. What was this river? This river is Barak, sir. Apart from Barak, we also have a river like Daleshwari. Daleshwari is not so important, but Barak is very important. And now what is very, very important is this river called as Kaladan, an alternate route for northeastern state via Myanmar, sir. Right, a river called as Kaladan. So these are the river, right, they flow They have their origin, though not the origin, sometimes at least they have the flow along the slopes of this mountain. Right. Lushai mountain, sometimes you also call them meso hills. Some of the finest example of radial drainage in India, sir. Right. So inland drainage we have taken it, radial drainage we have taken it. Braided profile and superimposed profile, if you want, we can leave it, sir. 2 or 3 points if you want to add, because psychology says whatever is left, you are unhappy, sir. Right, sir. We'll just add few points. Braided profile, sir. And how about braided profile? Very popularly it is called as an obstructed flow, sir. It is called as an obstructed flow. See, what is braid? So whenever I have a river, and if this river almost distributes its water into different distributaries, such pattern of the flow you call them as braided profiles. You call them as a braided profile, or you call them as a braided flow of the river. So whenever the river distributes its water into different distributaries, this pattern of flow is called as a braided profile, sir. Right. Now, whenever I talk about the reason why the channel almost distributes its water into different distributaries, I understand because this distribution happens because of some obstruction, sir. So obstruction is the one which is causing the river to almost channelize the water into 2 or more streams. That's the reason you call them as an obstructed flow. Right. Now, for example, whenever I talk about this obstructed or braided profile, only 2 places you find this braided or obstructed profile. Only 2 places. What is very common? You are there in deltas, or you are there in near mouth region. Estuaries, you may not have it. Reason, estuaries is a wide open mouth where the carrying capacity of the river is not reduced. Delta is the region where carrying capacity of the river is reduced. That's the reason it goes for different streams. So mostly it is deltas or near mouth regions. Very common. Now comes the question. What is obstructing the flow of the river? Its own deposits. Right. I have the deposits of the river. The river carries the deposits near the near mouth, and over a period of time it starts as an obstruction. Once the obstruction rises, the number of tributaries increases. The number of distributaries increases. Right, sir. So one finest example where you find this obstructed flow is near mouth region, sir. Apart from this near mouth region, right, number 2 is Piedmont Locations, sir. Now what is this Piedmont location? You know, sir. Foothills. Piedmont location is foothills. So deltas I can understand. When I talk about Piedmont locations, imagine that I have a mountain. You are there in a mountain. And whenever I talk about the Piedmont location of the mountain, one thing I know. This is the place where this mountain is known for big boulders and rocks. Right, sir. Because whenever I have mass wasting taking place, landslide, layman's understanding, technically you call them as mass wasting. Whenever landslide takes place, all this weathered material, where exactly it gets deposited along the foothills of the mountain. And if I have a river which almost descends along the slope of the mountain, as and when it encounters some obstruction, here also I have the same braided profile which takes place. Right, sir. This is another place where you experience a braided profile or obstructed flow, sir. Piedmont location. So what is Piedmont location? You know, it is called as foothills. Right. Only 2 places. This obstructed flow is very common. Delta we know. And already we have seen one example of this braided profile. Finest example. In India, we have a region called as Tarai regions, where number of braided profile you will find. Right, sir. A permanent waterlogged condition you experience. Right. All that rivers which descends along the southern slopes of Shivalik. Shivalik is known for its Tarai region at the foothills. Finest example. Right, sir. So what is braided profile? We have taken it. And finally, the last type of drainage system, you call them as superimposed drainage. called as superimposed drainage. Now, what is this superimposed drainage? Slightly, if I have a concept called as, say, river basins. Say I have two rivers basins, sir, that is river A and river B. The next topic what we'll be seeing is a river basin, very small topic, but just understanding how exactly a river basin may look like. Even when I talk about your map, we are just looking for this Indian drainage system map. You would have identified that it means entire India is divided into different river basins. Right, sir, this is how a river basin may look like. So what is this river basin? A combined geographical location from where a river attains its discharge from. Right, layman's understanding, you call them as a catchment area. So for example, if I have a precipitation in this region, sir, all this precipitated water will be drained by a particular river. I call them as a river basin, sir. I call them as a river basin. Now, when I talk about a river basin, this boundary of a river basin is not static. It's dynamic, because the river itself is not static, we know. Right, it keeps on changing its course. If that is the case, boundary of the river basin is also not static. It can keep on moving or it can keep on changing. Right, sir. Now, whenever I have a mountain or a feature which divides two river basins, sir. If I have a mountain or a feature which divides two river basins, then this mountain I can call it as a water divide. This is what the definition of a water divide is all about. Though we have taken the informal definition of a water divide while discussing about Western Ghats, the perfect definition of a water divide, it says any feature or a mountain, right, when it separates two or more river basins, then it is called as a water divide. Now, when a mountain is dividing two river basins, the boundary of the river basin is almost static or it may not change, sir. Now, sometimes if I do not have a boundary, right, if I do not have a mountain which separates two river basins, there is always a chance that one river basin can be occupied or superimposed by another river basin. Now, whenever, say for example, this region earlier it belongs to that river A, if this river is now occupied by B, sir. Right. If B takes charge of this region, then the same I call it as superimposed drainage, sir. So what is superimposed drainage? Earlier this region was belonging to some other river. Now it is occupied by some other river basin. You call them as a superimposed river basin. Sorry, superimposed drainage. Right. You can take it as a paragraph. What is this superimposed? When an old river basin is partially or completely occupied by a new river basin, then it is called as superimposed drainage. Right. So what is superimposed drainage? We have an idea. Right. It is all about the changing nature of a river basin. Now comes the question. Generally we say river basins or the changing nature of river basin, superimposition of the river basin is very, very normal, common. But today when I talk about the superimposed drainage, right, the rate of superimposition is almost accelerating. What can be the potential reason? It is anthropogenic modifications, sir. Man-made modifications is seen as one of the major reasons for changing superimposed drainage nowadays. Now comes another question. What are the different activities of human being can result in superimposed drainage? Anything and everything that is accepted, but some of the very popular mechanisms, sir. Construction of dam. So when I talk about construction of dam, it can change or it can alter the river basins in general. Apart from construction of dam, Ken and Betwa, when I talk about Krishna and Godavari, these are examples where we are talking about interlinking of rivers. Right, sir. Interlinking of rivers can change the or it can result in superimposed drainage. Construction of dam can result in superimposed drainage. Deforestation, whether it has a relation or not, it results in superimposed drainage, whatever it is. Right. Some of the human activities can also result in superimposed drainage. Right. So with this, we are completing the drainage patterns in India, sir. And the last topic, a very small topic, you call them as drainage basins. Now you have an idea what is a drainage basin. Formally, you can take the definition what is a drainage basin. The combined geographical location, or before that, when I talk about drainage basin, what is drainage basin we know, right? Whenever a river along with its tributary and distributary drains a particular place, collective geographical location, which is drained by a particular river, you call them as a drainage basin. Layman's understanding, you also call it as a catchment area, sir. What exactly you are catching? Precipitated water, right, sir? Source of the river, sometimes also called as river basins, sir. The other name you also call it as a river basin. One and the same, all are one and the same. Catchment area of smaller region, you call them as a command area, sir. You call them as a command area. Very small region, you call them as command area. Right. Now, what is the definition of a drainage basin? You can write it, sir. The combined geographical location. The combined geographical location from where the river attains its discharge from. Where river attains its discharge from is called as river basin. Right. Further you can write, based on the area of the river basin, it can be classified into three categories. Based on the area, it can be classified into three categories. That is one. You call them as major river basins. Two, you call them as medium river basins. And three, you call them as minor river basins. Right, major, medium and minor river basin. So based on the area, you call them as major, minor, and medium and minor. So what is this major? So whenever you have the combined area of more than 20,000 square kilometer, you call them as major, sir. When I talk about minor, it is less than 2,000 square kilometer of an area, you call them as minor. And whatever lies in between, that is 2,000 square kilometer to 20,000 square kilometer, you call them as a medium river basins. Right, sir. Now, to some extent, this major river basin in India is almost important, sir. Now, when I talk about this major river basins in India, totally, I have 13 major river basins in India, sir. But again, 13 is one magical number. Often it gets repeated. Right, sir. So, 13 major river basins are there in India. And this 13 major river basins in India itself almost contributes somewhere around 85% of total area, sir. Right, sir. So, rest, the medium and minor put together, they contribute only 15% of the remaining area. Now, these 13 major river basins are important for us. Approximately, we will go for geographic order first, then we will go for descending order, and if at all, if some observation is important, that we will take it. Now, if you are there in this drainage basins map of the world, in India, we are just going for this geographical order, sir. You can start your journey from Jammu and Kashmir. Almost if you are there in Jammu and Kashmir, you may find rivers like Indus, sir. The drainage basin that is resulted by Indus. 13 river basins, geographical order, first come Indus, sir. Then slightly if you are just almost taking this clockwise order. From Indus, then you are landing into this river basins of Ganga. Number 2 is Ganga. Number 3, you are there in northeastern state. You are there in the river basin of Brahmaputra. Complete northeastern state. You find it in Brahmaputra. Right. Again coming to the mainland India. Number 4, we have rivers like Brahmini. Number 5, you are there in Mahanadi, river basins of Mahanadi. Number 6, you are there in Godavari. 7, it is Krishna. Number 8, it is Penneru. Penneru itself is a separate river. Penneru. Number 9, it is Kaveri. Right. 9 in order. Now further taking a clockwise turn again. Right. When I talk about Malabar and Konkan coast, we do not have any major river basins. The next only river basin is almost contributed by this river called as Tapi, sir. Number 10 comes the name of Tapi. 11, it is Narmada. 12, it is Mahi. And 13, it is Sabarmati, sir. So what the order what we have taken is the geographical order. Right. Now, to some extent, this ascending and descending order is also important. Mostly, the descending order is important for us. 1, 2, 3, 4, we'll just take it. Now, why I insist on that, that also I'll just tell you, sir. So, for example, this is completely geographical order. When I talk about almost descending order in size, the largest river basin is contributed by river Ganga, sir. By size also you can take the order. The largest is Ganga. So when I talk about the geographical area which is drained by Ganga, somewhere around 8,61,000 square kilometer it drains. The data is also given in your atlas. The same atlas, you have one bar diagram is also given. One table is also given, sir. Both the places you find the approximate data is given. So combined geographical location which is drained by Ganga. Somewhere around 8,61,000 square kilometer it drains. Right, sir. Now number 2, when I talk about second, distant second. When I talk about distant second, it is Indus, sir. 3,21,000 square kilometer. Indus. Number 3, closely followed by Godavari. That's the reason among the peninsular river, the largest river is Godavari. That's the reason Godavari often you call them as Dakshin Ganga, Ganga of the south. Right, sir. So third largest is Godavari, somewhere around 3,12,000 square kilometer. Number 4 is Krishna, sir. Somewhere around 2,80,000 square kilometer. Krishna, number 4. Only 1, 2, 3 and 4 we'll just note it. Rest is not important. Among the major rivers, the smallest river is Sabarmati, sir, followed by Mahi. Right. Now what is to be noted here, that also we'll take it. For example, when I talk about Ganga versus 2 and 3, sir, put together. 2 and 3. When I talk about Ganga, along with Indus and Brahmaputra, sir. Right. Indus, the second largest river basin in India, and the Godavari, which is the third largest river basin in India. If you take the combined land mass, if you take the combined area, this combined area is still smaller than that of Ganga. Right, sir. This is one observation. So even when I talk about Indus and Godavari put together, what is drained by them is still smaller than the area which is covered by Ganga, sir. This is one very important to be noted, fact to be noted. Right, sir. The second important fact what we'll note, for example, if I'm just comparing Mahanadi versus Narmada. Right. Mahanadi versus Narmada, which river is a longer river? Undoubtedly, Narmada is a longer river, sir. So when I talk about Mahanadi versus Narmada, when I talk about the length of the river, which is longer? Narmada. Now comes the question, which is larger? It is Mahanadi. Right, sir. When I talk about the river basin, area-wise, Mahanadi drains more area. Narmada drains very small area. Reason you know, Rift Valley. Right, sir. Getting connected with other tributaries is very normally it is not possible. So again, one matter of comparison. If I'm just comparing the length of the river, Narmada is longer than Mahanadi, but Mahanadi is larger than Narmada. Right, sir. These are the observations what we have taken. Right, with this Indian drainage system, we are completing it, sir.